All right, it's been a few minutes, and I'm going to pop a ball out and shove it in my mouth. Hey everyone, it's Kenji. I'm going to be making some meatballs. My daughter's school has a potluck this evening, and so I'm going to make a big batch of meatballs. Today I'm cooking in my new pan. This is a collaboration with Our Place. This is the Titanium Pro Our Place pan, everyday pan. What's unique about the pan is that it is a nonstick pan that is also completely heat proof. You know, so the nonstick coating doesn't come off in the heat because there is no nonstick coating. It's just titanium, and it's metal utensil proof. So you can move your balls around with a metal spatula if you'd like, and it's also you can cook acidic ingredients in it because it's not, you know, like carbon steel or cast iron. When you cook acidic ingredients in it, some of that iron flavor comes out into the food. Whereas with this titanium coating, sorry, not titanium coating, but titanium layer. It doesn't. All right, so I got a couple slices of bread. I'm just using shokupan. We're gonna start by making a panade. You know, so the main difference between a meatball and say like a hamburger or a sausage is that with a hamburger or a sausage, with a hamburger, you know, it's just straight up meat. With a sausage, you're actually adding salt to it and seasonings as well. You know, and with a sausage, what ends up happening is that salt is going to cause the meat proteins to kind of unravel and bind together. And that's why, you know, a sausage has a really nice sort of snap to it. Whereas with a meatball, you're really going for a much more tender texture. You don't want a meatball to be snappy. You want a meatball to be juicy and tender. And so that's the reason why we use a binder in meatballs, something like bread and egg. Those sort of physically impede proteins from binding with each other. But I'm just doing a real simple meatball. I think I've probably shared this recipe, or at least a video of this, a similar recipe in the past. I don't think I've ever printed this out. Maybe I have, but we'll do something similar to what I generally do. It might be a little different than previous ones, but this is about sort of the simplest meatball recipe you can do. You can do breadcrumbs, you can do fresh bread like this, you can do stale bread. Some people, you know, they'll use really old dry stale bread, and what they'll do is they'll kind of soak it with water and then squeeze that water out to get themselves some really nice softened bread. But I'm just going straight up with an egg, a couple slices of bread, and some milk in there. You could also do buttermilk, you could do half and half. You could do oat milk if you'd like, but something to sort of add moisture to it is the idea. And then let me see, we'll use some, do we want Parmesan or Pecorino today? I'll do Pecorino. So some Pecorino Romano, some sort of hard grating cheese for these, and a fairly decent amount of it. A lot of sort of the tanginess and the flavor in the meatballs is going to come from this. You know, meatballs, I think of it really as sort of a process as opposed to a specific recipe. You can swap out the cheese, you could do no cheese, you could add inclusions like, you know, pine nuts or raisins, whatever herbs you like. You could add like a spice blend, like harissa would be really delicious in meatballs. So, you know, whether I'm making like Japanese tsukune, you know, Japanese meatballs, or these sort of Italian-American meatballs, or anything else, the process is going to be basically the same. Some sort of binder, and then some meat. I'm going to throw some parsley in there as well. Maybe I'll do some parsley and some basil. We're gonna bunch it all up together. Keep our knife against our fingers. Gonna cross like that. And because I'm doing this for a potluck, I'm gonna make these meatballs pretty small, and I'm gonna fry them. If I was making them like, you know, for my family for a dinner, I might make sort of bigger meatballs, and I might start by, say, popping them on a tray and doing them in the convection oven or in the air fryer. to get some browning on them, but because we're going so small, if you tried to do that in an oven or an air fryer with smaller meatballs, you'd end up sort of overcooking them before they brown properly. All right, so 2 different types of meat. I got ground pork and ground beef. Actually, you know what? I'm just gonna go in. I have some more. Most of my recipes, they call for like a 1-to-1 ratio of pork to beef. I have a full pound of beef here, so I'll just go ahead and put in a full pound of beef to a half pound of pork. What you find, you know, you can do it all with one type of meat, and that's not going to it's not going to harm it. You end up with a different texture and a different flavor, though. You know, ground pork tends to be a softer meat. You know, ground beef muscles are tougher than pork muscles, and beef fat is also more highly saturated than pork fat. And so while pork fat, you know, like rendered lard, for example, is kind of creamy at room temperature, beef fat is more sort of waxy and firm because it's more highly saturated. And so the fat molecules line up a little bit better, and that's why they sort of get this firmer structure. So by combining ground beef and ground pork, you get sort of the softness and tenderness of that pork fat, but the more robust flavor of beef. Oftentimes, you know, old-fashioned meatloaf mixes or meatball mixes would include some amount of veal as well. Veal, you know, because it's a young animal, its muscles have not fully developed yet, and so its connective tissue tends to be higher in collagen, and so veal meat, collagen converts to gelatin as it cooks, and so veal meat will add lots of gelatin to the mix, which makes it more tender and also helps make it retain moisture better. These days, it's pretty hard to find ground veal. You can get it. You can do like an equal part beef to veal to pork. You can also, I think in other recipes I've published, probably the one in my book, The Food Lab, I have a recipe for meatballs where you actually add some powdered gelatin to the mix, which can help the meatballs retain moisture as well. All right, so I'm going to be frying these meatballs in my Titanium Pro always pan. A pretty decent layer of oil here. This is olive oil. It's extra virgin olive oil, but not sort of the fanciest one, just the one that I would use for frying in for flavor. So a layer of oil in there at the bottom. As you're forming meatballs, you do want to use sort of wet hands like this so that the meatball mix doesn't stick to your hands. And I'm just going to do a bunch of small balls. If this were not a nonstick pan, you know, something like a stainless steel pan, I would wait for that oil to really heat up before I add the meatballs so that they don't stick here. But because that titanium is a nonstick surface, I'm going to just go ahead and add the balls while the pan is still in the process of heating up. And if all goes right, which I assume it will because this pan has been sort of heavily tested, those balls should not stick at all. All right, so I'm just going to keep doing this. You don't have to watch me do the whole thing, but so I might cut forward a little bit. All right, so we got our balls frying here. Let me give them a little flip. And you can see I'm fine with going in with a fork directly onto that surface because, well, it's not coated, so it's not going to, there's no coating there to scratch. You know, the reason you don't want to use metal utensils in a nonstick pan, a coated nonstick pan, is because you end up scratching off that nonstick coating, and not only does it make the pan no longer nonstick, but it also gets those nonstick coatings into your body where you don't want them. But the non-coated titanium surface is really nice because obviously it's not as nonstick as something like Teflon. You know, as an engineered nonstick coating, it's sort of chemically impossible for that to be the case. In the same way that like a cast iron pan or a carbon steel pan will never be as nonstick as a true sort of coated Teflon style nonstick pan. That said, I don't need my pans to be as nonstick as Teflon. This will be as nonstick as sort of my best cast iron or carbon steel pan, with the advantage that you don't have to season it, that you can scrub it out with a sponge when you're done with it. You don't have to you don't have to care for it the way that you would a carbon steel pan. It doesn't rust It doesn't scratch when you use metal utensils. You can't burn off the seasoning because there's no seasoning. Anyhow, let's cook our second batch of balls. I'm just going to get these out of the pan now that they've got some browning. I don't, you know, there's some deep browning on the first side. I don't bother browning every single side of a meatball. You know, I find that by browning a couple sides, you get some really nice flavor in there. But, you know, there's always a trade-off when you're browning something versus not. And that's that when you brown things, they tend to lose moisture, you know, because you can't brown until you're above the boiling temperature of water. And so until all the surface moisture of a piece of food has evaporated off, you can't really brown it. And so, you know, when you really deeply brown something, whether it's a chunk of meat for, say, a chili or a stew, or it's a meatball, it will inevitably end up sort of drier and a little tougher than if you only partially brown it. So I kind of like to split the difference and get some real deep browning on some parts of it, but leave some parts of it a little paler so that they still remain nice and juicy and tender. All right, I'm going to get the rest of these balls in here, and then we'll be right back. Ooh, look at that browning. So this pan, it is tri-ply, you know, so there's a layer of stainless steel on the bottom, which really retains heat very well, you know, so which makes it great for searing. And then there's a layer of aluminum in the middle. Aluminum is a really good thermal conductor, so it sort of spreads the heat out nice and evenly. And then there's the titanium level on the top, which is what gives it the non-stick characteristics. So it, you know, it functioned in the way that like an all-clad tri-ply pan does, as far as sort of heat retention and the ability to sear, and the ability to sort of really distribute heat evenly. But it has the non-stick qualities of a non-stick pan. All right, let's dump our balls. So these balls at this point are not fully cooked. They are really only browned on the outside. So at this stage, we are going to finish them into sauce. And I'm going to keep the sauce real simple. I'm going to first dump out most of that oil, but I will leave the sort of brown bits in the bottom of this pan. Add a little bit of water to there, and then kind of scrape those brown bits up. Those are going to help flavor our sauce. But because our meatballs are so highly seasoned, I'm not really going to bother adding any seasonings at all to the sauce. It's really just going to be good quality good quality canned tomatoes. I'm using Bianco di Napoli crushed tomatoes, which I think are excellent. But any good quality canned tomato will work. Let's get, I think we can go whole can in here. Whew. We get whole can whether I want it or not. Stir in that brown business. You could deglaze with some wine if you'd like, as opposed to just straight up water. Okay, I'm going to throw a sprig of basil in there. Maybe, let's say 2 sprigs of basil. Maybe I'll throw in a couple parsley stems too, just for some flavor. And that's really it. You know, you could build this out into a more complex sauce if you'd like. You know, you could take some chopped garlic, maybe some pepper flakes, some oregano, and very briefly saute them in that leftover fat from frying the meatballs before you add your tomatoes and your herbs. But I find you really don't need to. Just tomato, salt, and then we'll get our meatballs back in there and let them simmer. And so there's going to be some flavor exchange that goes on between the balls and the sauce. Like sort of any meat, you know, whether it's a sausage or a meatloaf or a steak or a chicken breast or whatever it is, you know, meatballs can also overcook. There's a lot of sort of built-in protection with a meatball against overcooking, meaning that, you know, even if they do slightly overcook, they're still going to be plenty juicy because you have those binders, because you have that panade in there. So they can retain their sort of tenderness and their moisture level much better than a sausage or a plain piece of meat can. That said, you know, the best meatballs are ones that are cooked just through the same way. You know, you don't want to sort of kill your hamburger with heat, you know, or kill your steak with heat. You want it to be cooked and then stopped when it's done. So that'll take, you know, probably about 5-7 minutes or so. So I will be back when these meatballs are done. So I'll see you in. All right, it's been a few minutes, and I'm going to pop a ball out to shove it in my mouth. I'm going to split it in half and see where we are. Oh yeah, those look nicely cooked through, but still real juicy like. Look at those juices. Yum. Okay. I do think pecorino is the way to go with meatballs. I don't know. Pretty pleased with those. All right. I'm going to plate some of these up so that Lena and I can eat a few, and then I'll save the rest for the potluck. You know, obviously you could serve these with spaghetti. You can serve them in a sandwich. But what am I going to do? I'm just going to serve them in a plate. Get some of that nice sauce around. Do we have any bread? I don't think we have any bread left. I think we just used up the last of the bread, but...
We got a couple bagels.
Bagels.
Shove a ball in the hole.
All right. Got our balls. I'm going to finish it off with another grating of pecorino. Oh, let's do some burrata too. You know, burrata's on everything these days, and I don't know if it's like, maybe it feels overplayed, but I'm not mad about it. I like the sudden availability of burrata. Let's do a few little clumps here and there. When life gives you cheese like this, you know what I say?
What do you say?
Hakuna burrata. Some chopped parsley and basil. Let's get the rest of those in there. A drizzle of the good stuff. All right, and that is my easy, no real recipe needed meatballs. By the way, you know, I kind of eyeballed the seasoning that went into the meat mix, which is something you can do if you're confident with yourself, or if you've done it enough times to know what the appropriate pinch of salt feels like in your fingers. That said, if you're not sure about how well seasoned, how properly seasoned your meatloaf mix is, or your meatball mix is, what you can do is take a little piece of it, put it in a bowl, and then stick it in the microwave for like 10 seconds. You know, just like a piece about the size of like a dime, and stick it in the microwave for like 10 seconds, and that will cook it, and then you can taste it and adjust your seasoning accordingly. Should we do a little pepper too? All right, there we go. All right, meatballs. Mamma mia. Not spicy, but that's a zesty meatball. Meatball. Yeah, all right. Juicy and tender and well seasoned. Delicious. I think the sauce is really nice and bright. Just barely cooked, really good quality tomatoes. Good. All right. Guys, gals, non-binary pals. Oh, the other thing, did I mention you can throw the tomato sauce right in this pan because it's not cast iron or carbon steel. Oh, I did mention that, didn't I? Okay. All right. Guys, gals, non-binary pals. The Titanium Always Pan Pro in brushed steel is my collaboration with Our Place. It is a wonderful tool that really works, yeah, I'm going to be using it. All right, see you later.